She endured humiliation and ridicule from those who thought they were superior to her. But no one knew that this cleaner knew more than they could imagine. At the most difficult moment, she decided to take a step that would turn the whole company upside down. What happens next, and how will it turn out for those who humiliated her? Subscribe so you don't miss new stories, and write in the comments where you're watching us from. Martha had walked the halls of the startup every day for the past several years, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors as she moved her cleaning cart from room to room. Her figure was a familiar one in the office, a dark silhouette in a faded blue uniform, her hair always neatly tied back, her hands worn from years of quiet labor. Yet, despite her years of service, no one really knew her. Martha was there, but she wasn't seen. She was a shadow that moved through the space, unnoticed and unappreciated. Every morning, long before the first employee would arrive, Martha stepped into the building, the sun just beginning to rise outside the glass windows of the high-tech office. Her day began in the stillness of the early hours, when the air was cool and the office was silent. She would unlock her supply closet, pull out her tools, and begin her routine. Dusting the conference tables, vacuuming the floors, wiping down desks, and emptying the trash bins. The office, with its sleek modern design, buzzed with innovation and energy once the employees filled the space. The large windows let in streams of natural light that reflected off the chrome fixtures and glass walls. Young, ambitious workers in their crisp, stylish clothes carried laptops and phones, their conversations quick and technical. Everyone seemed to have an important place to be, and they moved with purpose from one meeting to another, from one project to the next. But amidst the flurry of activity, Martha was invisible. No one greeted her when they passed. No one stopped to ask her name or to acknowledge her presence. She was part of the furniture, as much a fixture as the office chairs or the shiny countertops she polished each day. It was as if she was a ghost, floating through their lives without leaving a mark. Despite this, Martha had learned every inch of the office. She knew which desks belonged to whom, what habits each person had, who stayed late to work on projects, who always left coffee cups on their desks, who complained about the smallest of inconveniences. She knew the schedules of the managers, the programmers, the designers, and the executives. She saw everything, but no one ever saw her. Martha's uniform was simple and worn, a faded blue shirt and slacks. It contrasted sharply with the well-tailored suits and designer clothes of the employees who walked past her without a glance. They were people of the future, building apps, discussing venture capital investments, and dreaming of making it big in the tech world. They lived in a bubble of their own ambition, and Martha was not part of it. But it wasn't just the absence of attention that weighed on Martha. The insults, the condescending comments, the quiet mockery, these were a part of her daily life as well. The young employees often let their careless words slip, thinking she wouldn't hear or wouldn't care. Some even thought it was amusing to speak down to her. Martha, in their eyes, was no one of consequence. Can you believe how she's always so silent? Like, what's there to be quiet about? Just cleaning floors, right? One young man had said to his colleague as they passed by her. She probably doesn't even understand half of what we're saying, another added with a chuckle, his words laced with a subtle racism they didn't bother to hide. She's just here to clean up our mess. These words stung Martha, though she never showed it. Her face remained neutral, her hands never faltering in their work. But deep inside, the comments, the disrespect, the casual cruelty all added up day after day. It was like layers of dust she couldn't quite wipe away. Martha had learned to steel herself against the hurt, though it still weighed on her heart. She had grown up in a world where people like her, black, working class, a woman, were often treated as if they didn't belong in certain spaces. She had experienced this her whole life, and the tech world was no different. Here, where innovation was celebrated and forward-thinking ideas were supposedly the heart of the company, Martha found the same old prejudices and elitism lurking just beneath the surface. But Martha's quiet demeanor hid a keen sense of observation. As she cleaned the pristine surfaces of the office, she watched the people around her carefully. She saw how the employees, so full of ambition and potential, slowly began to lose their sense of camaraderie. The friendly banter that once filled the air gave way to cold, competitive stares. Conversations that used to include jokes and laughter now turned sharp, with veiled insults and passive-aggressive comments. Teams that once worked closely together started to drift apart, each person looking out for themselves. At first, it was subtle. Small disagreements over project deadlines, a misplaced blame for a bug in the system, a snide comment about someone's contribution. But over time, the atmosphere grew heavier, tenser. Martha could feel it in the air, like a storm brewing. The company was still making money, still gaining new clients, but something vital had been lost. The team that had once been united in their goals now seemed to be falling apart. One day, Martha overheard two young developers arguing in the break room. They were both rising stars in the company, known for their talent and creativity. But now their voices were filled with frustration and resentment. "You always take credit for my ideas," one of them snapped. "I'm the one who did all the work on that feature, but you're the one getting all the praise." "Maybe, if you actually spoke up more, people would notice your contributions," the other retorted, arms crossed, glaring. As the argument escalated, Martha, who was cleaning the floor nearby, became a silent witness to their feud. She didn't say a word, but she could see how the bitterness between them was spreading through the company like a virus. It wasn't just these two. Nearly everyone in the office had become more guarded, more competitive, and less willing to collaborate. The leadership of the company was no better. The managers, who had once encouraged open communication and teamwork, now seemed distant and distracted. They held meetings behind closed doors, their faces growing grimmer with each passing week. Martha would clean the boardroom after their tense discussions, and the traces of their anxiety were palpable in the air they left behind. She could feel the company slipping into chaos, and she knew it wouldn't be long before everything came to a head. But even as the tension grew, Martha remained invisible. No one noticed how she moved through the office, quietly watching the collapse of a once promising startup. As the weeks passed, the pressure only mounted. Investors were starting to ask questions. Deadlines were missed. The once bright and bustling atmosphere of the office became stifling, with each employee feeling the weight of impending failure. The founders of the company, who had once been so optimistic, now walked around with stress etched into their faces. They tried to keep the team motivated, but their words felt hollow. In the middle of all this, Martha continued her work. She cleaned the glass doors, vacuumed the carpets, wiped the tables. Her role hadn't changed, but the company around her was unraveling. Every day, as she worked in the quiet of the early morning or late evening, Martha found herself reflecting on the irony of it all. The employees of the startup thought they were building something grand and important, something that would change the world. But in their pursuit of success, they had forgotten the simplest truth, that it was people, human beings, who built and sustained any organization. And when those people were disrespected, when their contributions were dismissed, the foundation of the company began to crack. And now, those cracks were starting to show. Martha had always known that her work was important, even if no one else acknowledged it. She kept the office clean, yes, but she also saw herself as a caretaker of sorts. She made sure the environment was orderly and welcoming, a place where people could focus and thrive. She took pride in her work, even if it went unnoticed. But now, as the company spiraled into dysfunction, Martha wondered how long it could last. How long could a company survive when its foundation, its people, was being eroded by ego and arrogance? She knew the answer, even if the others didn't. The day would come when everything would fall apart, and Martha, the unnoticed shadow, would be there to witness it. The tension in the office had been simmering for weeks, but now it had reached a boiling point. Martha, as always, silently moved through the space, observing the growing cracks in the foundation of the startup. The once vibrant and collaborative environment was gone, replaced by cold glares, hushed conversations, and barely concealed hostility. It wasn't just a few individuals who were at odds. Everyone seemed to be at each other's throats. Small disagreements that would have once been brushed aside now turned into full-blown arguments. Teams that had once worked harmoniously together were now fragmented, each person looking out for their own interests. The once open floor plan, designed to encourage collaboration, now felt like a battlefield, with invisible lines drawn between factions. Martha moved between desks, vacuuming the floor as two developers argued nearby. They were the same ones she had overheard weeks before, but their conflict had only worsened. Their voices were sharp, filled with bitterness. "You keep blaming me for everything. I can't fix it if you're not even doing your part," one of them shouted, slamming his hands on the desk. The other scoffed. "Maybe if you weren't so slow, we wouldn't be in this mess. I'm tired of covering for you." Their fight continued as if Martha wasn't even there, just like all the other times. She kept her head down, moving around their desks, but the words pierced through the air. This wasn't an isolated incident. These arguments were happening all over the office. It was clear to Martha that things were spiraling out of control. The energy that once drove the startup had turned sour. Ambition had given way to greed, and teamwork had been replaced with a toxic blend of competition and resentment. As she finished vacuuming and moved toward the break room, she overheard another conversation, this one between two project managers. Their words were quieter, but no less cutting. "I don't know what the founders are thinking. They're putting all their trust in that new strategy, but it's going to blow up in their faces. I'm not going down with this ship," one of them muttered, leaning against the counter. The other nodded, a scowl on her face. "I've already been looking for other jobs. I'm not sticking around to watch this place crash. If they keep ignoring the real problems, there's no saving it." Martha continued cleaning the countertops, listening quietly as the managers vented their frustrations. It was the same everywhere she went. Fear, anger, doubt. The company was collapsing, and no one knew how to stop it. Worse, no one seemed to care enough to try. As the days passed, the situation only deteriorated further. Employees were leaving earlier, productivity was plummeting, and the founders were growing desperate. They held more meetings, huddled behind closed doors, trying to come up with solutions to save their failing company. But Martha, who cleaned those meeting rooms after every tense discussion, knew they were grasping at straws. It wasn't long before the founders called an emergency all-hands meeting. Martha was in the break room when she heard the announcement over the office speakers. "All staff to the conference room in 5 minutes. She knew something big was coming. There had been whispers of trouble for days, but this felt different. The office grew still as employees filed into the large conference room, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Martha didn't follow them inside. Her place wasn't at the meetings. She was supposed to be invisible, after all. Instead, she continued her work just outside the glass walls of the conference room, where she could see everything that unfolded. Inside, the founders stood at the head of the room, their expressions grim. The CEO, a man who had once been full of passion and excitement for his company, now looked exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice heavy. "I know things haven't been easy lately. We've been facing challenges, and I won't lie to you. It's been difficult." The room was silent as everyone listened, some employees shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Martha could see the tension in the air, the way people exchanged wary glances, wondering what was coming next. "We've lost key clients, and we've missed several deadlines," the CEO continued. "The investors are nervous, and we're running out of time to turn things around. We've been working on a new strategy, but it's not enough. We need everyone on board if we're going to make this work." His words hung in the air, but they didn't seem to inspire the room. If anything, the employees looked more disillusioned than before. They had heard promises of new strategies and big plans before, but nothing had come of it. They were tired of being asked to fix problems they hadn't created, and their loyalty to the company was wearing thin. One employee raised his hand. "And if it doesn't work, what happens then?" The CEO hesitated. Martha, who had paused outside the room, noticed the flicker of doubt across his face before he quickly covered it. "We're not thinking about that right now. We're focused on what we can do to get back on track." But the employees weren't convinced. The murmurs started. Quiet at first, but growing louder as people voiced their concerns to one another. The room, which had been so full of energy and hope in the early days of the company, now felt suffocating. It was as though the weight of every missed opportunity, every argument, every broken relationship was pressing down on them all at once. And then, amid the tension, something snapped. David, one of the lead developers, stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This is bullshit," he shouted, startling everyone in the room. "We've been working our asses off, and for what? So you can give us another pep talk about getting back on track? We're not the problem, you are." The room erupted into chaos. People started shouting over each other, voices clashing in a cacophony of blame and frustration. Martha watched from her post outside the room, her heart heavy as the company she had worked in for years tore itself apart in front of her eyes. David wasn't finished. "You think we don't see what's going on? You keep telling us everything will be fine, but it's not fine. You've lost control of this company, and we're the ones paying for it." The CEO tried to regain order, but his voice was drowned out by the growing uproar. Employees were turning on each other, accusing one another of being the cause of the company's downfall. The room that had once been full of promise was now a battleground, with everyone scrambling to protect their own interests. The meeting ended in chaos, with no resolution in sight. Employees left the room in frustration, some muttering about quitting, others too angry to speak. The founders stayed behind, looking utterly defeated. Martha could see it in their eyes, the realization that their dream was falling apart and they were powerless to stop it. But the worst moment came just after the meeting, as the employees filed back to their desks. One of them, David, still fuming from his outburst, spotted Martha cleaning near the entrance to the conference room. His face twisted in disgust. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered loud enough for her to hear. "Even the janitor's probably laughing at us now." Martha froze, her hand tightening around the handle of her broom. She had heard insults before, but this one, in the midst of everything falling apart, stung in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the words. It was the venom in his voice, the way he looked at her as if she were less than nothing. "You should probably stick to cleaning floors," he sneered before walking away, leaving Martha standing there, her heart pounding. That was it. That was the final straw. For years, Martha had endured the dismissive comments, the looks of disdain, the feeling of being invisible. She had accepted it as part of the job, a reality she couldn't change. But now, as the company crumbled around her, she realized something important. She had watched these people tear themselves apart, blinded by their ambition and their egos, and through it all, she had seen what they couldn't. The real problem wasn't their strategies or their clients, it was their lack of respect for each other. And Martha had had enough. As she walked away from the scene, her mind was already racing. She had always been the silent observer, the one who kept her head down and did her work without complaint. But that was about to change. She wasn't invisible anymore. The office had never been this quiet. After the explosive meeting, a heavy silence had settled over the startup like a thick fog. Employees returned to their desks, but their minds weren't on their work. They were too distracted by the chaos that had just unfolded, the bitter arguments, and the complete lack of direction from leadership. Some were typing, others staring blankly at their screens. But the energy of the place, the once vibrant drive of innovation, was gone. Martha continued her rounds, but something had changed in her as well. The words David had hurled at her during the meeting replayed in her mind. They stung, not because they were new. Martha had endured countless similar comments over the years, but because they came at the exact moment when the company was at its lowest point. She had always believed that her role was to keep her head down, to do her job in silence. But as she walked the now empty corridors of the startup, she realized that silence was no longer an option. The company was falling apart, not just because of financial struggles or missed deadlines, but because of the poisonous culture that had taken root. Ambition had turned to arrogance, and collaboration had turned to competition. People no longer saw each other as colleagues, but as obstacles in the way of their own success. And now, the startup that had once been full of hope and energy was on the verge of collapse. Martha finished her shift, wiping down the last few tables in the conference room, the same room where the meeting had spiraled out of control. As she cleaned, she could almost hear the echoes of the arguments that had taken place just hours earlier. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind was racing. She had been in the background for too long, watching as this company, her company, crumbled. And she had seen everything. It wasn't just the insults she endured or the messes she cleaned. It was the way the employees treated each other, the way the managers dismissed the concerns of their team, the way people at the top ignored the voices of those at the bottom. Martha knew, better than anyone, that the problem wasn't the business model or the product. It was the people. They had lost sight of the most important thing: respect. Martha paused for a moment, her reflection caught in the glass of the window. For the first time in years, she saw herself not as the invisible cleaner, but as someone who had been watching, listening, and learning. She had heard their secrets, seen their frustrations, and understood the dynamics of the office better than any of the managers or executives. And now, standing in the center of the empty room, she knew what she had to do. The next morning, the office was buzzing again, but not with the usual energy. Instead, there was a low hum of anxiety. People whispered to each other in hushed tones, speculating about the future of the company. Rumors were spreading that several key employees were planning to leave, that the investors were pulling out, and that layoffs were imminent. The founders called for another meeting. This one, they claimed, would be to address the company's future and lay out a plan for moving forward. It was clear to everyone that this was a last-ditch effort to save the startup. Most employees shuffled into the conference room reluctantly, already bracing for the worst. Martha was in the break room when she heard the announcement for the meeting. She knew what was coming. Another round of empty promises, another failed attempt to fix what was broken. But something inside her had shifted. She couldn't stand by and watch this happen again. As the employees gathered in the conference room, Martha finished cleaning the counters and slowly made her way to the glass walls that separated the break room from the meeting space. She stood quietly, her eyes scanning the room, watching as the founders tried once again to rally the team. Their words were hollow. Their attempts to inspire met with blank stares and crossed arms. No one believed in their vision anymore. No one believed that things could get better. Martha took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed open the door to the conference room. The employees barely noticed her at first. After all, she was just the cleaner. But when she stepped forward, clearing her throat, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, puzzled expressions crossing their faces. Why was the cleaner standing in the middle of the room, interrupting the meeting? Martha felt their stares, felt the weight of their expectations, or lack thereof. She had been invisible for so long, and now, in this moment, all eyes were on her. "Excuse me," Martha said, her voice calm but firm. "I think it's time someone said something." The founders looked at each other, confused, unsure of what to make of this sudden interruption. David, the same developer who had insulted her just the day before, scoffed from the back of the room. "What does she think she's doing?" he muttered under his breath. But Martha didn't falter. She had spent too many years in the background, too many years hearing the same tired excuses, too many years watching as the people in this company tore each other apart. It was time for the truth. "I've been working here for a long time," Martha began, her eyes sweeping across the room. "Longer than some of you. And in that time, I've seen a lot. I've seen how this company started, with passion, with energy, with the desire to build something great. And I've seen how little by little that passion has turned into something else. I've watched as you've stopped caring about each other, as you've let your ambition blind you to what really matters." The room was silent. Martha could feel the tension, but she also saw something else. Recognition. Some of the employees were nodding slightly, their faces softening as her words sank in. They knew she was right. They had felt it too, the way the culture of the company had shifted, the way they had lost sight of their original vision. "You think the problem is the product, or the clients, or the deadlines," Martha continued. "But that's not the problem. The problem is how you treat each other. You've stopped seeing each other as people. You've stopped respecting each other. And that's why this company is falling apart." She let the words hang in the air, the weight of them settling over the room. Martha's voice was steady, but there was an intensity behind it that surprised even her. For years, she had been quiet, invisible, a part of the background. But now, standing in the center of the room, she felt more present, more powerful than she ever had before. The founders exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. They had expected complaints from their employees, but they hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected the woman they had overlooked for so long to step forward and speak the truth. Martha turned to David, her gaze unwavering. "Yesterday, you said something to me that I haven't been able to forget. You said I should stick to cleaning floors. Well, I've been cleaning your mess for years. And it's not the floors that need cleaning. It's this company." David's face flushed red, but he didn't say a word. The rest of the room remained silent, waiting for what would come next. "I don't need your apologies," Martha said, her voice softening. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm here because I care about this company. I care about the people in it. And I know that you can do better. But it starts with how you treat each other. It starts with respect." She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was still quiet, but the energy had shifted. The employees, the managers, even the founders, they were all looking at her with something new in their eyes. Not pity, not dismissal, but respect. Martha wasn't just the cleaner anymore. She was the one who had seen everything, the one who understood what had gone wrong, and the one who wasn't afraid to say it. The CEO, who had been silent throughout her speech, finally spoke up. His voice was quiet, but there was a new resolve in it. "You're right," he said, his eyes meeting Martha's. "We've lost sight of what's important. We've lost sight of each other. And if we're going to save this company, we need to change that." The employees nodded in agreement, some murmuring their approval. Martha felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew this was just the beginning. Words were one thing, action was another, and there was still a long way to go before the company could truly heal. But for the first time in a long time, Martha felt hopeful. The truth had been spoken, and now it was up to everyone in the room to decide what they would do with it. As the meeting came to a close, the CEO approached Martha, his expression one of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. "We needed to hear that." Martha nodded, offering him a small smile. "You're welcome," she replied. "But remember, words are just the beginning. It's what you do next that matters." With that, she turned and left the conference room, her step steady and sure. She had spoken her truth, and now the future of the company was in their hands. As she walked back to the break room, Martha felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't just a shadow anymore. She had a voice, and she had used it. And now it was up to them to listen. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. Give it a like and share it with your friends. We also invite you to watch our other stories. See you in the next video.